Hey, this is Giacomo Smith from Kansas Smitty's, and you're listening to Live at 5. Before we start today, I just want to remind you that we rely on your support to continue through this period. So remember to subscribe to this YouTube channel and click on the link in the description below to see where you can donate, sign up for a Smitty's membership, or buy our records and merchandise. Thanks a lot for tuning in. Live at 5, and you are with us here. I'm Giacomo Smith, and today we're joined by not only our producer Darcy O'Connor, but tenor saxophonist from the Kansas Smitty's house band, Alec Harper. How you doing, Alec?
I'm good, G. How you doing?
Really good, really good. So it's we're slowly working our way through all the members of the house band. And this is because I miss playing with all of them a lot. So this is kind of a little project to see what their individual voices can do when we're not able to play together. And Alex, I think, coming from, a similar place from me in that when somebody asks you to play solo saxophone, you think, well, how am I going to do that without a band or without any kind of accompaniment? But he's laid down a few tracks today that are awesome, and as I knew they would be. And we're going to jump straight into some music now. And this is Isfahan by Billy Strayhorn, Alec Harper on the tenor sax. That was Alec Harper with Isfahan. So, Alec, I have a few questions to ask you before we jump into the questions from the chat. Um, but I guess my first one is kind of, what was it like for you growing up in a musical household? Because how did you find practice time with everybody? With everybody. So what does your mom play? Does she play violin or viola? And does she play? She plays like historical performance kind of stuff, right? Or does she play just modern? I don't know. What's your family's musical kind of thing? And why don't you have a family band?
This is a good question. We'll come back to that. My mum is a great viola player, and she focuses predominantly on early music, baroque music and other early music. And yeah, what was it like growing up in a musical family and like practicing? It was interesting because
Isn't your sister a singer too?
my sister is also a singer. Yeah, my sister's a classical singer. She's an opera singer.
Right.
Although when I was growing up, she mostly played cello, and she was kind of like dabbling with singing a little bit, and then gradually fell a bit more into down that path, and that became more of her focus, which it is now. She's a professional singer now, and the cello just sits in a cupboard somewhere, just wanting to be played. But yeah, it was great growing up in a musical family. My dad had a regular job, but he's also a really good singer. And yeah, it was fun. I had some lessons with my mom and did some things with her growing up, and she always pushed me and my sister to play music, but also to explore other things as well. And there was no kind of pressure growing up to become a musician. In fact, if anything, there was quite the opposite. My mum actually told me when I was growing up that it's important to learn something else to be able to support yourself for when times are tough. So right now, I'm just going to say to my mum, I really, really wish I had learned how to be a plumber right now. That could be useful.
Do you think
anyway.
that people who come from musical households are at an advantage when they go into music, or do you think that it's really kind of like a self-starting thing that you kind of you discover for yourself, and that's it? Because I could kind of see it going both ways, but I'm curious.
I think it goes both ways, because I think if you're inquisitive, and you realize that you have taken an interest in music, it doesn't really matter what your parents do. I know plenty of people from completely differing backgrounds who are equally as great, well-rounded musicians. But I certainly think that from my point of view, it was interesting growing up, listening to a lot of classical music. My parents didn't really listen to much else when we were growing up, and I remember in long car journeys. Sometimes I would get a little bit fed up of hearing like Baroque music when I was growing up. And actually, my parents didn't really listen to a lot of jazz. So that was kind of always my own thing. When I discovered that I enjoyed, playing saxophone and playing jazz, that was kind of my own pursuit. So yeah, I kind of was quite different than the rest of my family in that respect.
Cool.
It's a good time to jump in with one of those questions from the chat, actually, Alec.
Yeah, cool. All right. Darcy, hit us.
What was the album that inspired you to pick up the tenor sax? Or, if you were already playing beforehand, what was the jazz record that sort of put you down that path?
So I started, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but I started on clarinet, actually. And I played a tiny bit of piano before that, but I really, really wanted to play clarinet. And so first of all, I was doing that, and I was doing mostly classical, and then every now and then I would do a little bit of, kind of slightly more jazzy stuff. But I didn't really have much listening at the time. Like I wasn't really listening to any jazz records, and weirdly enough, I wasn't really inquisitive. Then I started playing saxophone, alto, And I did that for a while. I think actually my parents once for Christmas got me a David Sanborn album. Would you believe?
Amazing.
I'm not
Best.
kidding. Yeah, I'm not kidding. And I just used to jam along with that. And then again, they got me another record. They got me this like Ben Webster, Coleman Hawkins record, which I can't remember. It's been such a long time since I've listened to it. I can't remember the name.
That's what
But
it's called.
is it
That's
just like Ben encounters Coleman or Coleman encounters Webster or something like that?
That's a fantastic record.
That was great. Yeah. And I actually remember none of the names of any of the songs on that record. But for some reason, and I don't think I've ever tried to play any of them, but for some reason, as soon as I hear them, I feel like I just know them so well. I'm totally like I could play it back. But yeah. So I think it was probably that was like the first time I really heard like tenor saxophone, and it's such a great sound.
That's such a so relates back to one of the questions that we had yesterday from Diana about ear training. And if you listen to a record enough, you don't even know the song titles, but you know the songs inside and out, and you feel like when you hear them, it feels like you're playing them, and that's when they're really kind of etched in your memory.
Yeah, and that's also, I mean, obviously you know me better than most people, but that is very, very true of the way that I approach music. I can often be in situations where I don't remember the name of the song, I don't remember what key it's in. I may not even remember like the first line, but if someone just kind of prompts me, it all just comes like flooding back really quickly, which is, it's kind of the way I go.
Right. That's just the way it goes.
Yeah.
So let's jump into another tune from Alec. This is a favorite of his. It's called Purple Gazelle. It's also called Angelica. And I believe this one is written by Duke Ellington. And this is Alec Harper. You're listening to Live at 5. And we're back with Alec Harper, who wishes he'd become a plumber. Alec Harper, tell me about going to school in New York from from Guildhall or going to school in Boston, excuse me, from Guildhall, and then moving to New York, and then moving back to London. What's, in terms of the jazz scene, I know that, most, bright-eyed young jazz musicians dream of moving to New York, hopefully not in the midst of a global pandemic, but they do dream of moving to New York, where all their heroes lived and played. What was it like going to school in Boston at NEC, and what was it like living in New York for a brief period?
Yeah, it's a good question. Going to school in Boston was, to me, a big step up, just in terms of really like focusing on specific musical things and being around some of the people that I was really like checking out, on the live jazz scene, and listening to their records. It was amazing to be around these people,
like who?
These American people like Donny McCaslin and Jason Moran and Jerry Bergonzi. These kind of massive names in jazz, who I think when you're in England, it's such a great jazz scene here, but maybe you're a bit isolated from the American scene, because it's often quite difficult for American touring musicians to come through England for some reason. They go to Europe a lot, but they don't really come through London so much. So yeah, it was mad. I mean, it was crazy being that, like Billy Hart, being in school and seeing these people in the corridors for the first time. You're just like, whoa, this is wild. And so it was a big step up, I think, in terms of inspiration for me. And it was also interesting, like I kind of took a bit of a different turn when I went to NEC. Like I was at Guildhall before that, as you mentioned, and I was very much going down the kind of New York straight ahead jazz route. Like that the people I was listening to were like Ambrose and Walter Smith and like Chris Potter and all those kind of guys. And that was like the route, like the saxophone route that I was going down. And then when I got to NEC, something quite different happened, and I kind of discovered like free music and improvised music, and I got really into that for a while, and kind of delved down that route, and almost like left behind the idea of being like a straight ahead jazz musician. It was like, no, this suits me better. This is what I want to do. So that was really cool. And then gradually I kind of, came back to, I guess you could say, my roots a bit more in the jazz tradition. And I started to find ways of incorporating both of those two things together to find a bit more of a personal musical voice for myself. And yeah, so that was quite a lot going on really at NEC. Quite a big journey.
So who inspired you to kind of go down a freer, I don't really like the term free jazz, because it doesn't always kind of sum up what's going on in that style of music. But what would you call it? Would you call it free improv? Would you call it improvised music? Or
yeah, so it's a good question. I studied with this guy at NEC called Joe Morris, who is this like ridiculous guitar player, just phenomenal. You'll never hear anyone who sounds like that. And I studied with him for a while, and he actually breaks down the history of improvised music into different categories. So off the top of my head, you've got like, I think you've got harmolodics, which is it's like Ornette Coleman, that kind of style. It's definitely like a specific style of playing improvised music. Then there's like European free jazz, which I think kind of derives a bit more from contemporary classical music. So you're going to hear a lot more like people like Evan Parker, you're going to hear a lot more like exploration with sound, as opposed to trying to almost like further the history of jazz, which in a sense like did become freer, like those records with John Coltrane and late John Coltrane. That kind of shows you it's like John Coltrane came from definitely playing bop, at the start,
right,
and then evolved, and eventually, the music he's playing in his late period, like Meditations and Om and that stuff, it's totally different. So I guess that maybe I would call more like free jazz.
Right. I see.
And then there was also like Anthony Braxton is like a whole other thing. He has this whole concept. So I kind of learned these different methodologies, as you know, Americans like to say, these different like methodologies of improvised music. And it's fascinating, honestly. Like each of them has their own language, just like in jazz, just like lots of different styles of jazz. They all have their own language. They all have their own kind of structures, and they all have their own influences, you know. And so it's very fun getting into each one, checking out specific artists and trying to transcribe a bit and get a bit of a flavor of what they do. And it's really, I really kind of started to go pretty deep into that stuff.
And I'm sure that's eye-opening, you know, then when you do return to, you know, when you do return to playing more straight ahead jazz styles, and you know what you do with Smitty's and where the kind of direction that I push us in, and it's I can definitely hear that you have those other perspectives coming into play.
Yeah, it's really useful, I think, to any musician actually, just to have, like, you know, it's such like a cliche to say it because everyone always says it, but it's genuinely to have like an open mind. And I think maybe a better way to describe it is to have like a really wide palette of things you can draw from, you know. So that you find yourself in a certain musical situation playing a song, and it might be, you know, it might be a style that you're not necessarily like a master of, but maybe you have a bit of a flavor of it because you've checked it out and you've played some of those tunes, whether it could be like Brazilian music, or, you know, could be anything. Or maybe there's like an intro to a song which is a little bit more open, and you're forced to explore some different ways of playing the saxophone, like trying to create some different sounds than just playing through scales or notes that work like we're kind of, you know, often taught at, you know, jazz school.
Definitely.
So, yeah.
Definitely. Darcy, do we have any other questions to jump to in the chat?
Yeah, I think like what we were just speaking about there kind of relates to Tyler Rindo's question, which was,
hey Tyler.
Hey Tyler.
Is how do you guys add to your jazz vocabulary? If that, I don't know, maybe that's convert that into your own sort of language, but yeah, like how do you guys keep adding?
I think that's a great question, relating back to what we were talking about with Joe Webb the other day about music, you know, improvising music as a language, you know, that different styles of music that you improvise over, which is a lot of them, even some facets of classical music, but different styles of music require different improvisational languages. So when you're kind of mastering the style or trying to master the style, your first avenue is emulation, and you listen to something and it's like window shopping, and you say, I'm going to steal that from him, and I'm going to steal that from her, and I'm going to steal that from wherever I can. And then you put together your own thing. But then later you can mix up those styles and kind of create something that's more original. I know that's a really broad idea, but Alec, maybe you can answer in a more kind of specific way.
Yeah, something came to my mind. I remember when I was younger and I was learning jazz, and I was completely convinced that I had to be unique and I had to have my own sound and my own voice. And this is like, all jazz musicians know this is kind of like drilled in from when we're quite young in development, that we're at an early stage, but eventually you'll develop your own voice. It's what everyone always says, right? And it was always very hard for me to think, okay, well, I'm working at these things now, but how was that going to develop into my own voice? And I think that when I kind of let go of the idea of sounding like myself, and I just enjoyed playing music and not really worrying too much about where I was taking this kind of language from, or where I was taking this from. I guess I became a bit more of like a stylist, which some people say, this person's a stylist. And when I enjoyed being more of a stylist, I think I then started to just develop little things that I kind of always came back to, like little pieces of phrasing maybe, or the way that maybe I use vibrato, or the way I use articulation. Obviously, as a saxophone player, that's really relevant. And then eventually you kind of just refine a little bit, and you start to put together like your own thing, but definitely like not being ashamed of drawing from other people and trying to emulate other great musicians, because I want to know what they did to sound like that. I want to know why they sound so good, and if I can take a little piece of that, wow, that's great.
I think that's a perfect segue to jump into one of a song played by, I know, one of your favorite sax players, and this is a song that I can't say, but Alec is going to say, because I don't know how to say it in Portuguese, but this is played by Stan Getz and João Gilberto. What is it called?
That's a great question. I'm just looking up because I can't quite remember myself.
It's Para Machucar Mu Karasu.
Yeah, there you go.
So,
well said, Alec.
This is
well said.
This is Alec Harper. You're listening to Live at 5. Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and to click on the link in the bio below to find out more about what we're up to in this weird lockdown period. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we have some more after the music for you. So let's listen to Alec. Darcy, hit it. So, Alec Harper, what do you think about playing solo? I mean, I think that's it's a big challenge for any of us as like single line instrumentalists to figure out. Well, particularly in jazz, you get used to hearing a rhythm section, and you get used to hearing your voice, you know, in a kind of choir of voices, and it's like asking somebody in the Sunday choir to take a long solo one week, and they
Yeah.
think, oh, how am I gonna do that? Um, so how did you find it doing these recordings?
Yeah, it's a challenge, you know. It's as a saxophone player, you obviously you don't have any, you know, like a piano would, you don't have any of the harmony at your disposal. Um, so you kind of have to just, I guess the way I approached it was to think about things like rhythm, which I've been working a bit on this week anyway. Thinking how I could make that strong, you know,
Right.
and how I could get people at home to, when they were listening, to be hearing the rhythm really clearly, and not missing, you know, the drums that weren't there, obviously. Then also, it's weird, obviously, because yeah, like I say, you don't really have any harmony as a saxophone player. And I remember me and you have talked about this before, like playing solo on saxophone is interesting. You have to decide how much of the harmony are you going to try and fill.
Right,
How
right,
often are you
right.
going to try and be your own accompaniment, you know? And so I was kind of grappling with that question, and how much I wanted to try and accompany myself, or how much I wanted to just leave the space and be okay with the fact that I was just playing the melody, and nothing else. And so I think with the three recordings I did, I think I tried to give slightly different examples of that. Um, and hopefully if I did something like that again, I would probably try and do completely different, you know, examples again, and explore more ideas. But yeah, I guess I just wanted to keep it quite simple, and not really try too hard to fill in too much of the harmony, and just kind of hear the track in my head, and just, yeah, just play through it in quite a organic way. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I mean I think the thing that carries over when I listen to you play, you know, the thing that carries over the most is not the, because when you say rhythm, you're saying that you kind of you're experimenting with rhythms in your playing, but what I hear underlying all of your playing, and and I think this is so unique in a kind of single line instrument, is your sense of rhythm. And you know, you can it's I can feel I can feel subconsciously that you're hearing a rhythm section in your head. You're not just missing that it's there. So that in terms of listening, from a listening perspective, it has a grounding effect on the person listening to it. And I think, you know, the for me, like the some of the best unaccompanied, you know, music for one instrument are the, you know, the Bach solo cello suites. And I know
Mm.
they're not jazz at all, but he probably improvised them, you know. I mean, he probably sat down for 5 minutes and just wrote them out, you know, because that's I think Bach used to compose by improvising. But anyway, they're not improvised now. But when you hear a truly great performance of them, um, you feel that underlying sense of rhythm from the person playing. And it's the same with playing kind of you know, a solo improvised piece in a jazz style as well. So but I think the thing that's the hardest thing is not actually listening to it, because you know, the people that are out there listening to it are going to say, well, yeah, that sounds nice, that sounds like a saxophone, I like saxophone, that works. But the hardest thing is actually in our heads, because we're so used to playing with an accompaniment, is actually just focusing on the sound of the instrument.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're so much more, all basically all elements of your playing are totally exposed, you know. There's nothing to hide behind at all. Like, every tiny little quirk in your sound is going to be exposed. Like anytime you slightly break a note or make a little fluff on a scale or something you're playing, it's right there in front of you. So yeah, I guess I'm happy with what you said. That's great, because I think the main focus for me was making sure that the time was really coming through, and that was kind of grounding everything, and hopefully making it slightly more compelling and easy to latch onto for the listener. So that's cool. And I mean, I wouldn't always approach everything in like a rigid sense in terms of time. Like I'm definitely really up for playing things loosely, and I just kind of decided for this specific day, given that it was something that I've been working quite hard at the last week, I wanted to kind of see if I could get a document of that and see how I'm getting on.
Well, yeah. Awesome. Before we wrap up, I just want to ask Darce if we have any more questions in the chat, or
just one question that came through earlier from Jay Simmons again. Hi, Jay. How did Alec come to join the band? How did you guys meet, actually? I'd love to know that.
Oh gosh, right. This is such a good story, isn't it?
I can't believe somebody's actually asked this.
If anyone's watching from the band right now, I know they're just holding their head up like, I've heard this story so many times.
Yeah.
I think you should say it, G. I think you give a better rendition.
Right. So the way that I met Alec the first time was that I was booked on a gig by a mutual friend of ours, and it was a restaurant gig in the corner of a restaurant, which can be really hard work if you don't know who you're playing with, because it's like the speed dating of jazz. You turn up and you're expected to make music for 3 hours with these guys that you've never met before and you probably never want to meet again. No, that's not true. You might never meet them again. And so I got called for this gig, and I knew that Dave Archer was on it, who's the guitarist in Smitty's. And, we've done a lot of playing together, and we've worked on a lot of repertoire, and we know a lot of songs. So I called the guy up that had booked me, and I said, look, there's a third guy on the gig. But why don't you just pay him and tell him to stay home, because he'll be happy to have the night in. It'll be a Friday night. He'll get 100 pounds and he can just stay home. We'll have a fun time playing the gig and everybody's happy. Which I thought was a pretty good deal for you, Alec, considering that you were going to be the guy that was staying home. So then, of course, Alec turns up at the gig, and he takes his horn out of the case, and we got along from note one, and it was probably the best gig I've ever played in that restaurant. I almost considered sending Dave home. Dave, if you're watching, I didn't really mean it.
Yes,
but but that's how we met. And actually, Alec was living in Boston at the time, and we became good friends because I go back to the States. Well, I mean, I was going back to the States frequently to see my mom and to teach and to do other stuff. And so we would hang out in Boston and play. And then, I kind of started asking Alec relentlessly if he would join the band, because Adrian had left to do Bad Manners. And we had all these 3-horn frontline arrangements of tunes that we couldn't play. And all the stuff that we've talked about before, you kind of, when you join Kansas Smitty's, you need to bring a few things to the table. And it's, one is a broad range of stylistic influences, which Alec, really had. 2, you need to be able to learn all material by ear, because we don't use any sheet music and never have. So all of the arrangements, he had to take down for himself off the record. And then the third one was that he had to get along with all the personalities in the band,
and
which I'm still working at. So that's been the struggle, that's been tough. They say you can only have 2 of the 3, can't you? So,
so Jay, to answer your question, that's how Alec got involved. I tried to unbook him on a gig, and 5 years later, he's in the band. So there you go. Does that answer your question?
I would say it does. I'm not Jay, but I'll speak on behalf of him right now.
Great. Do we have any others in there?
We have one last one from Diana. To be able to be in the same band, do you have to have similar methodologies, as you call it?
I think you don't have to have similar ones, but you have to cross over in a number of places. So, from a musical standpoint, there I think a lot of people that wouldn't really agree with a lot of great musicians that wouldn't really agree with the kind of no sheet music aesthetic of Smitty's, or they might not necessarily want to play the kind of old style jazz that we play. They might, that's kind of something that we're interested in that a lot of more modern jazz bands aren't. Alec, do you have anything to add to that? I mean, I think you probably understand that from a different perspective, having joined the band later.
Yeah, I definitely think there is a lot of common ground. We've all kind of like walked some of the same paths in life in terms of the music that we've listened to and we've played. But I came to the band from kind of a different place, I guess, than most of the rest of you. I hadn't really played a lot of like early jazz, which at the time when I joined, that was mostly what you were doing. Obviously, like things have evolved and you don't only do that. Well, we don't only do that now, but I hadn't really played a lot of that rep. But at the same time, I had heard a lot of it, and I listened very intensely to it. I didn't just kind of think, I don't like this. I just happened to have not been in any situations really where I needed to play that music. So that was we definitely had common ground. But then something that's interesting to add is that, me and Giacomo, we text all the time, like relentlessly. In fact,
well, you text me, I don't text back.
But, yeah, of course. Sometimes my wife gets a little bit up. No, I'm kidding. But no, we text a lot with music that we're doing, things to check out, and never a feeling that it's a problem for you to like something that someone else doesn't like. It's just always cool that everyone's bringing their own kind of spice to the rack, everyone's kind of allowed to be themselves, and that, I think that's also, as well as having some common ground and similar methodologies, it's really important to a band that people are pushing for slightly different things, because that's what keeps it moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I mean that is the kind of ethos of Kansas Smitty's, as a band, is that of acceptance, of all musical styles. And it's and everybody in the band is interested in, everybody's interested in an overlapping period of music, but then after that it's all different kinds of stuff. So I think that's why we get along. We don't have any more music for today, but we will be back tomorrow with Will Cleesby, the drummer in the band. But thanks so much, Alec, for Zooming with us, and thanks, Darce, for producing.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Cool. We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you. Thanks again for listening to Live at 5. Remember to subscribe to this channel and click on the link in the description to see where you can donate, sign up for a Smitty's membership, or buy our records and merch. See you tomorrow. Thanks again.